Hey there folks, and welcome to the Badger Pilot. As all of you have likely heard by now, there was a tragic mid-air collision between a regional jet and a military helicopter just outside of Washington, D.C.'s Ronald Reagan Airport. I'm not here to summarize the crash or try to determine why it happened. There are plenty of other channels out there that do a great job of that kind of analysis. And I'm not a flight instructor or an aviation crash investigator. But as details are starting to emerge, I can't help but notice some of the parallels between this accident and the flight that was the topic of my last video, where I flew the Chicago Skyline at night. Making this video is my way of journaling my thoughts, a self-evaluation of how I can be safer when I make similar flights in the future. And of course, I'm sharing it publicly in hopes that it might help make other people safe as well. As information becomes available, it's not uncommon for people to analyze the data and try to figure out what happened. Very early on, there has been some information available about this mid-air crash. Now, it's important not to speculate about what happened, but talking about the facts that are known can help us lead to some possible answers. It's these facts that I'm bringing into my own flying to try to stay safer. In my last video, I flew along the Chicago Skyway at night. And there are multiple options for routes, but in this particular case, I flew along the shoreline. This is a visual navigation route designed with specific altitude restrictions at certain landmarks.
2000 by Navy Pier. It blows my mind that we can do this. That's so pretty. That's pretty awesome.
The purpose of this is to allow general aviation traffic to pass below the extremely high volume of traffic going into and out of O'Hare and Midway without becoming a conflict. Believe it or not, you can fly this route without even talking to an air traffic controller, although it's generally considered to be much safer to do this on flight following with ATC. VFR flyways like this exist all around the country to allow GA traffic to fly safely in the vicinity of the busiest airports without having to alter their course too dramatically. In the DC crash, early indications seemed to show that the helicopter was flying along a similar type of route, a US helicopter route designed specifically for helicopters to fly at low altitudes, tunneling underneath the busiest traffic flying into DCA. Just as the VFR flyways have altitude restrictions, these helicopter routes also have strict altitude restrictions to prevent them from being a conflict with other aircraft. There are early reports that radar shows the helicopter climbing above the altitude restriction for the area they were in. As a GA pilot, this is a stark reminder that if I'm flying along the Chicago Skyline, staying both within the lateral and vertical restrictions are paramount for safety. One thing that didn't make it into my video last week, but now is on the forefront of my mind, are the constant reminders from the controller to stay within the boundaries of the flyway.
Let's say going up the shoreline. Patch flight 2756. Once you get past Gary's Delta, they'll have to have you go 2300 below up the shoreline.
Doesn't help that I'm also taking us off course to the left a little bit.
Patch flight 2756. You said you wanted to go up the shoreline, correct?
He's probably noticing we're going off course too. That's a nice gentle reminder of him, like, hey buddy, you're pointed right at Midway and O'Hare. Yeah. So we'll give him the benefit of the right turn, due north.
One of the things we as GA pilots can do is build in our own redundancies. Fly with another experienced pilot that can double check that you're meeting the requirements and have an environment in the cockpit that encourages anybody to point out a potential safety hazard or an error in flying without fear of ridicule or negative response. Going back to DC, as the helicopter was flying along the river, he said that he had the regional jet in sight and would follow behind it. One of the possible theories that has emerged from this crash is that he may have had the wrong traffic in sight. We don't know if that's the case, and we may never learn the answer, but I can tell you from experience how easy it is to get confused about which plane ATC is actually pointing out. In my last video, I even articulated that I had called out a plane in sight that might not have actually been the one that ATC was telling me about.
Got him.
Traffic inside Cherokee 402.
I think that call was actually the plane out there, but I still got him. We got a lot of them.
That plane had also been told about me, and because of my position relative to them, I was incredibly difficult for them to see, and I don't think they ever even saw me. Which makes sense, because my positioning was lower and towards the shoreline, and I likely got lost within the city lights. In the DC crash, there hasn't been any mention about the regional jet attempting to see the helicopter, let alone having visual contact. But they were in a very busy phase of flight and likely wouldn't have been able to focus much on scanning for traffic. And when I'm flying along the Chicago Skyline, airlines are flying only 1,000 or 2 feet above me in critical phases of flight, putting the onus on me to see and avoid them. It's also important to remember that even if I have traffic in sight, keeping a visual on that traffic at night can be very difficult as they move in front of or behind city lights, or make a turn so that the plane presents differently than I had originally seen before. Moving forward, as soon as I can see other traffic, my attention needs to be divided only between flying the plane and keeping that traffic in sight, and minimize other distractions like sightseeing or looking at something inside the plane if possible. Lastly, it's been mentioned that the helicopter may have seen the correct plane but was unable to properly gauge the distance because of optical illusions at night. From flying the Chicago Skyline, I know firsthand how difficult it can be to judge the motion and distance of larger planes. The landing lights are incredibly bright and easy to see, but it's incredibly difficult to judge the distance of the plane. The only way I could get an idea of distance along the shoreline was by seeing where the landing light reflected off of Lake Michigan and judging it by that. But traffic that was over the city itself was next to impossible to judge how far away that they were. And when the landing lights are facing you, there's almost no relative motion, giving the illusion that the plane is just hovering in space rather than closing in on you. These are just a few lessons that I'm emphasizing from looking at parallels between the DC crash and my personal experience. If you have any other lessons that you're taking away from this incident that you think can help make GA safer when flying in congested airspace, please share your thoughts down in the comments section. Again, I want to emphasize that I have no plans on becoming an aviation crash investigator. I'm not an instructor, and these are just my own personal thoughts. But hopefully, others can reflect on similar lessons so we can all be safer in the skies. My thoughts and prayers go out to all of those who were affected in some way by this tragedy, be it the friends and family of the victims, the air traffic controllers that worked the scenario, the witnesses that saw it firsthand with their own eyes, and the first responders that worked tirelessly through the cold night searching for any survivors. Hopefully, someday we'll have all the answers as to how this could happen and how we can prevent it in the future, and hopefully it will bring closure to all of those involved. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Badger Pilot.